Japan, sagot sa gerahan, mga kutsero. Ayan. Usap-usapan kanina, alam naman natin na nagpunta ng Japan si President Bongbong Marcos at si isa po sa mga napag-usapan dyan ay itong ang seguridad ng ating rehiyon dito sa Southeast Asia. Prime Minister Kishida, Pbbm, okay to strengthen security ties. Nako, mas hindi naman lumalala. Pero mukhang humahanap talaga tayo ng mga kakampi na titinig para sa atin sa bansang Pilipinas. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida on Thursday agreed to strengthen Manila and Tokyo's defense and security relations in response to growing Chinese military pressure in the region. So, magtutulungan ang Japan at ang Pilipinas para ipagpatuloy na palakasin ang seguridad ng dalawang bansa. And over the course of the many debates na naka-join tayo, actually naging involved tayo sa, hindi naman debate, pero discussion groups. Sa discussion groups sa Twitter Spaces. Ayan, shout out kay Teyatan for inviting me sa Twitter Spaces. Siyempre, nakakarinig tayo ng opinion ng mga iba't ibang tao. No? And it's not just those who are supportive of the administration, but also those who are not supportive of the Edca. Ito po yung ano dyan ito po kasi masaklap. Yung mga sinasabi po ni Sas, kahit na medyo hindi maganda ang bagsak sa tenga, medyo it's also valid. It's also valid. Hindi ho maganda ang ating history pagdating sa pakikipagtrabaho sa mga Amerikano. Pero tulad nga po ng sinabi ko recently, it's better to work with the devil you know than the devil you don't. Kasi mas madali mong makokontra yung mga plano niya kung kilala mo siya. Kaysa sa demonyo na hindi mo kilala. Narinig natin yung itong war games. US war games daw. The battle of the next war. War gaming a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. Ayan. Ito po ay report na ginawa ng Center for Strategic and International Studies. Pinag-usapan nila dito yung the possibilities ng isang gera sa gitna ng Taiwan, US at China.
Taiwan looms large in U.S. defense planning as well as in U.S. grand strategy. In military terms, China is by far the most capable U.S. competitor today. Beijing claims Taiwan as an integral part of China despite the island's long separation from the mainland and its de facto self-governance. And as long as U.S. policy asserts that it might defend Taiwan in the case of attack, that task will be among the most difficult faced by U.S. defense planners. Many factors will determine whether China might use force, not least the political decisions of the various protagonists. But among the most important calculations behind those decisions will be that concerning the military balance of power. Despite this, there's little structured analysis in the public domain about these issues, and this project was really an effort to address that gap. With that as the goal, we created a game that models both ground combat on Taiwan as well as the naval and air war that would stretch much farther afield. The scope and boundaries of the project are important here. The project does not imply that war is inevitable or even necessarily likely, just that it's indeed possible.
Narinig na po natin ito lahat, no? It's not a question of if, but when. Parang sigurado sila na mangyayari ito. Yung gera mismo. But the think tank says differently. Yung simulation daw nila is not a prediction of whether it will happen or not. We're only talking about possibilities. So, alam ko po, narinig po natin na merong nag-leak na document from a admiral or a general in the US na by 2025, magkakagera with US and China. Marami na narinig din po natin sa iba't ibang mga international relations and geopolitical experts na it is inevitable or mangyayari siya. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Ang sinasabi po ng pag-aaral na ginawa na itong think tank na to, na CSIS, ito pong proyekto nila does not say or doesn't imply, hindi nila sinasabi, na pwede ngang umabot sa punto ng gera. Pinag-uusapan lang dito yung posibilidad. Okay, so malinaw po doon, at least. Tuloy natin.
Second, we're not advocating for or against the defense of Taiwan as part of U.S. policy. Our project addresses the likely outcomes of such a conflict and the costs involved. We do not make claims about the benefits of continued Taiwanese autonomy. That's just beyond the scope of the project. And third, we examine one particular type of conflict, a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. We acknowledge that other types of military conflict are entirely possible. China could also employ, for example, blockade or coercive missile attacks, and we encourage others to explore those possibilities. In a sense, this project is about uncertainty. We're discussing an event that might not happen using stochastic models. We therefore experimented with a number of specific variables or variations in the 24-game series. So, for example, we explored the impact of key variables such as how quickly and fully the United States engages in the conflict, the extent of Japanese involvement, and the relative quality and training of the various forces engaged. Broadly speaking, we reached two conclusions. First, under most circumstances, China is unlikely to succeed in its operational objectives or to occupy Taipei. And second, the costs of war would be high for all involved, as Mark said, certainly to include the United States.
Okay. Sa kanila daw pong 24 na war games na sinimulate, okay, sa 24 na kanilang ginawa, majority, hindi natin alam kung ilan yung most na yon or yung majority na yon. Most yung ginamit na term eh. Most probably the outcome will be China will fail to occupy Taiwan. Hindi ma-occupy ng China ang Taiwan. Pangalawang result ng kanilang war games. It will involve significant costs from all parties involved. Pero tuloy muna natin to.
Starting on the operational piece, the challenges confronting China in an invasion are severe. Historically, to subdue forces in a major island campaign, the attacker must transport large formations of soldiers and keep them supplied for weeks and possibly months for the duration of conflict. During the early stages of such a campaign, there's a requirement for specialized amphibious lift to move forces across beaches, though we make allowances for the use of the supplemental use of civilian craft as well. The game highlights both the limited scale of China's amphibious lift capability, despite its growth, and the vulnerability of its invasion fleet to modern air, missile, and submarine attack. To be sure, the Chinese amphibious fleet can land forces, so it does that in 100% of the games that we played. And the amphibious fleet is not without defenses. China is producing large numbers of advanced frigates, destroyers, and cruisers, as well as aircraft carriers. But these ship-based defenses are not sufficient to protect the fleet adequately during the critical first weeks. In most games, the US, Taiwan, and sometimes Japan employ thousands of anti-ship weapons and cause unsustainable attrition to the Chinese amphibious fleet.
Okay. Sino daw ang first participant sa first few weeks ng war games against China? US, Taiwan, and Japan, sagot sa gerahan.
The game does not assume that China would plan on sustaining the entire invasion through its amphibious fleet alone. The intermediate goal in this attack would be to capture Taiwanese ports and airports, and then to use a broader range of ships and aircraft, including civilian vessels, to transport troops. In the game, the China team often captures one or more such facilities by the end of the third week. However, those facilities are generally demolished by retreating Taiwanese forces prior to capture, or destroyed by U.S. missile strikes in the wake of their capture. And by the time China captures ports and airports, its amphibious fleet is effectively destroyed in most of the games that we played. In other words, China usually achieves too little, too late to gain overall success in the operation. Now, that is pretty much the end of the good news here. Matt and I are playing good cop, bad cop today, so I will turn the podium over to him to discuss the costs of war, as well as the caveats and conditions that pertain to that summary.
Thanks. So the positive operational outcome that we believe is most likely, that continued Taiwanese autonomy, requires 4 critical conditions. First, Taiwan must resist. If Taiwan capitulates immediately upon invasion, like Denmark or Thailand did in World War II, then there's nothing that the U.S. can do in order to reverse that capitulation. Second, the U.S. must quickly commit its own forces to direct combat operations against China. If there's no U.S. commitment whatsoever, we estimate that it would take about 2 or 3 months for China to conquer Taiwan if Taiwan resisted to the best of its abilities, but that success on China's part is inevitable. There's no Ukraine model for a Taiwan war. We can't simply try to resupply Taiwan and give them weapons during the war, because China will be able to intercept any sort of shipment. And any delay or hesitance on the U.S. parts only increases both casualties and the chances of Chinese success. Third, the U.S. must conduct operations out of its bases in Japan. The U.S. is legally required to consult with Japan before its employment of combat forces. And should that consultation not result in U.S. forces, particularly tactical aviation, operating out of Japan, then the U.S. intervention would not be enough to continue Taiwan's autonomy.
Sabi ni Kuya, the U.S. must legally request for its forces to use their airspace. Essentially ganun eh. Yung airspace, yung kanilang territory, bago sila makagalaw, makaposisyon against China. Okay? Pag hindi raw nangyari yon, anong sabi ni Kuya?
Consultation not result in U.S. forces, particularly tactical aviation, operating out of Japan, then the U.S. intervention would not be enough to continue Taiwan's autonomy. Any delay, and finally, the U.S. must have sufficient stockpiles of long-range anti-ship munitions, principally air-launched anti-ship cruise missiles. With thousands of these, it becomes a much simpler task, and there will be many fewer U.S. casualties. Furthermore, even a successful operation with continued Taiwanese autonomy means that there will be high casualties, types of which the U.S. has not seen in intensity since World War II, right? So throughout the 3 or 4 weeks that we model, China continues to attack U.S. aircraft as they arrive in Japan and U.S. ships as they deploy from CONUS, resulting in high levels of attrition to U.S. forces. In terms of human costs, we estimate that around 10,000 casualties or more could be involved, depending on what sort of scenario and assumptions the future holds. So these kind of losses in several short weeks raise questions about the impact, about how we should evaluate U.S. Policy and our security posture. To reiterate, for this project, we are not arguing against defending Taiwan any more than we are arguing for defending Taiwan, but that the potential costs of such a defense need to be part of the debate. And our hope is that this project builds on the great work that have been done on previous projects like CNAS's war games on the subject.
Bakit kailangan natin intindihin to? Kasi nga, mga kotsero, unang-una, ito yung palaging kino-quote. Ito yung palaging sinasabi na basahin nyo to, painggan nyo to para maintindihan nyo yung mga ganap. Okay, sige. Si Sendwave po ay isang mobile app na pwede nyo pong gamitin para makapagpadala sa Pilipinas ng inyong mga remittances nang wala akong remittance fee. So kung kayo po ay nasa US, UK, Canada, Italy, France, Ireland, and Belgium, ay i-download nyo na po si Sendwave. Okay, pwede nyo i-scan yung QR code na to, nasa tabi yung kulay blue. Scan nyo po yan para ma-download si Sendwave, i-register inyong bank details, at pwede na kayo magpadala ng inyong mga remittances sa Pilipinas ng, again, walang fees. At kung gagamitin nyo ang promo code na Coach Jarret sa inyong pong unang padala, ay pwede kayong makakuha ng $10 free credit. So, download nyo na po ang Sendwave para sa inyong mga remittance needs.